Mariel will be our first speaker. Mariel Belanger will be doing a performance at the Kelowna Art Gallery. He's going to start off with a curatorial talk and walk by Aaron Sutherland, who's curated the show there. So that'll start at 5, and the Mural's performance will be at 6. So it's free, everyone's welcome to come to it, and for my group of OCAD people, I might drive down a bit earlier, maybe go down to the Cooley Cafe or something like that, just to explore a bit more of the area, so keep in touch with me on that. I'm going to ask the artists to talk for about 15 minutes each. They'll be showing some work. And after that, we're going to do a panel. We're going to close the circle here, and I'll get everyone else to come into the space so everyone can see each other, and then we'll have a fairly, I think, fulsome conversation. Again, I'm going to try not to ask those moderated questions, so as you're listening to the speakers, generate questions, because I'd like to go straight to the floor and to the panelists after we're done, so we can see what sort of conversations arise from that. Okay. All right, Mariel Belanger. Mariel is from the head of the lake, Dry Creek, the northern part of the Okanagan Nation. She's an MFA alumna from UBCO, and is dedicated to contributing in the growth of interdisciplinary performance arts as a method to engage Indigenous community, language, culture, and act as a bridge to society telling stories of our time. As artist-scholar, her research is about identity through the lens of Escalo, ways of knowing and being, customary law, Indigenous feminism, and performance theory, exploring how cultural identity is built through oral history and performance practice. And just a quote from Mariel, I am doing nothing new, nothing that hasn't already been written and recorded, just carrying on as we've always done, learning, growing, being Scalo, Abna, not dreaming ones, the people now. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mariel.
Oh, it's kind of a great White Haskell Hall, Inchai Space Anson. Hello, good day. Welcome to the territory. We were so blessed to have Richard give us that beautiful rendition of our ways of knowing since time immemorial. I'm here to talk to you today about my artistic practice, using interdisciplinary performance art as a method of engaging community dialogue. Tomorrow, my show, as you can see on this photo here, is by Nadia Quandabens, is called Illegal Let's Live. And it was created as part of a project from the Testify Collective, which is a group of Indigenous lawyers and artists who came together in blind pairings. Dr. Greg Younging and I were paired, and he created prose based on the experiences that he had witnessed and had himself through the reconciliation process. And you'll be able to see that work tomorrow for the first time in Kelowna. The Testify Collective was put together as a way to generate dialogue for the lawyers, the Indigenous lawyers in Canada, so that they could articulate in a different way what art actually means to our cultural practice. And so we brought people in who were not lawyers and who didn't necessarily see themselves as being artists to witness this, and also to bring back home to their communities. So in this particular photo here, we have two young people, and for the life of me, I can't remember what the young woman's name was, but Taryn, he's an artist from Vancouver, and when we were in Santa Fe, we had come up with this idea of bringing in some younger people to get an idea about what they're going through when it comes to identifying as Indigenous today. And for them, it's about, taking the paint off, about not being covered in a whitewash. And so that was a literal wiping away. We also went to Saskatoon this last year for the Indigenous Bar Association's conference, where we brought a piece that had all pictures of murdered and missing Indigenous women, our family members, our loved ones, people living and who have passed. And we created this piece, which was just in the spur of the moment, where I ran around to each table asking in my language for some water in a little birch bark basket that had holes in it. And so people didn't understand what I was saying, but they could observe, they could see me at the other tables, and so by the end of every table, they knew to pour water into my container. But not all of their water stayed in. A lot of it came out. And that was kind of the thing, is like, we're always continually doing this work, but none of the knowledge is staying because it's always being wasted, through these cracks in the material. And we always have kids with us, because Ardith and Haley bring their children. And so their children are always a part of our practice. And like here, we always have children here too. We have Tanya's children and Michelle's children are here. So engaging them in our practice is pivotal, because they get it right away. There's no restraint from them. The notion here was that we were going to paste up all of the Canadian laws and the quotes, the hurtful things that people have said on Twitter and Instagram and everything, over our faces, our loved ones. And then try to get it off in the way that we're trying to get the lawyers to understand what repeal actually means. And so as I was trying to do that alone by myself, I pulled the first one off and it ripped and it made me cry. And at that moment, somebody came up and said, "Do you need help?" And I almost said no, because that's the instinct. We're so self-sufficient. And we need to learn to come back to community and bring all the people together. And so this was an act of that. And for the lawyers, they wanted to understand for themselves, how do I get the words of genocide off my face without doing any more damage? And the little bit of water that I was able to collect was all that we needed. We just were gentle with it, and we were careful. And all the people came, and you can see in this photo here, they were all very gentle and careful with trying to wipe it off and to peel that paper off. But none of it all came off, and that was kind of the point to the process, was that it's going to take a lot more than just that. I went to Chile in 2014. Before I came to the university, I was introduced to Rodrigo Airedale's there at the Imaginative Film Festival after I had a show called I Still Hear My Granny Speak, which is a story about my children and our return to language through the story that my grandmother tells. Here I am in the high mountain of the Amara Desert, wearing a buckskin dress that the women in the communities remembered their people used to make. I performed there. I had gotten my show, Illegal Let Us Live, translated into Spanish, into Chilean specifically, because it's a totally different kind of Spanish. And then after my show, I presented a giveaway to the community as a way of sharing and receiving, because I was learning so much just being there and being asked to speak about my experience as an Indigenous woman who is allowed to go and practice my art somewhere outside of community. Currently my practice is including using a Salish and sturgeon nose canoe, which was acquired into our possession as a society. So I have a society at home called Scalawapana, which is operated by a board of neighbors and family members who are associated with Insis Ulaut. Insis Ulaut means Dry Creek. It's an area that we live at, that my family has lived at specifically since colonization forced us to. And this particular creek is now the only watershed that is completely under OKIB control. And understanding what our responsibility is to the land is something that my art practice just kind of does naturally. Because in my understanding of protecting the land, I realized I needed to have the vessel that identifies us as being of the water. This is specific to the plateau. All of the people on the plateaus operated vessels like this. Because the land dictated it. The material was there for it up until approximately the 20s when Nikas became the hub of matchstick making. Western white pine was now wasted on matchsticks, and the bark became a byproduct. So Sean came up from Spokane last year to skin a canoe. It took us 5 days, and I had invited our community to participate because there's no point in me trying to bring Sean up to teach me how to skin something when I don't like to sew. And I'd like to share that kind of responsibility to the people who like to do that kind of stuff. And from that sharing, I'm able to continue my work. This picture here is a part of that work. It was taken up at Eagle Rock, which is between Vernon and the reserve on the mountain in between there. And a lot of that area is covered in unexploded ordnance, which ironically the government gave the Aquilini Group $11 million to clean up for development. This is an image of an installation that I have brought to my community as a pop-up exhibit. My brain is just not working today, sorry. And this was during solstice time. During the winter months is winter dance time. And in our community, we only have one person who is doing winter dance. And I am not a winter dancer. However, something came to me and told me that I needed to do this work at this particular time. And so I brought the canoe, and I also brought the Tulimat Lodge, which I had been working with community women and for the last year now. And I had some young people working on it with me because at 18 I was a teen mom, and I've pretty much been carrying kids with me the whole time, and I've been teaching them everything that I know. And to be quite honest, they resent me for that. But not everyone does. A lot of other people appreciate when I teach them how to do the things that I'm doing. And everything that I've learned, I've had to learn to teach the young people, because before I got here as a teen mom, the only work that I could actually do was being a youth worker, because I had kids and I couldn't go to work and leave them somewhere else. It just, my mom did that, and I didn't want to do that. So again, we had a lot of people come through to see this kind of work. It was mostly non-community members. We don't have a lot of people who like art, I guess. I don't know. I think that our communities have been very much damaged in terms of understanding what is valuable and in understanding how to create value. On the table here is some of the items that we had created over the course of a lifetime, really. The canoe paddle is Sean's, the basket is mine, it's from my performance. There's a cattail reed canoe that Barb Marchand made. She's one of my core mentors. I call her a marsh artist, and she has more than a PhD. This is our work out in the field. We're blessing the canoe after the community had put it together, and it was the first time a sturgeon nose canoe had been on Okanagan Lake in more than 100 years. And the two young women, Maria Alexis and Emily Wilson, are basically like my daughters, because my daughters were not there. And this is the reality that I've come to acknowledge, is that we don't have our families in the way that we used to. And art actually brings them back together if they allow it. like I was saying, my children, they're not really artists anymore, although they really could be. They're great artists. They paint, they draw, and those are two things that I don't do, which is ironic, right? But the other people get it, and I'm trying to instill a sense of love for art in our younger generations. In this other photo here, you see juxtaposition, a historical photo of women on the plateau in front of the Tulimat Lodge, and my grandniece, Winter, who is playing for the first time with a model-sized Tulimat Lodge that in any other era prior to colonization, she would have already learned how to make. And below is her mother standing in the pit that we created for the base of our Tulimat Lodge out in the field at Insisgulau. So I bring all of my work with me everywhere. It's a lot of work. I carry it. I think that we all, as artists, carry a lot more than we should. But there are reminders of places that we don't think of and value anymore, like the marsh. Donald Trump always says, drain the marsh, and it's like, you people, what are you saying? You don't understand that there's a whole entire worldview that is lost every time you drain one. Maria and I were able to sleep in the Tulimat Lodge for one night for the first time as we were menstruating like women were supposed to, learning how to put it up for ourselves. As young women, I imagined myself and Maria as being entering our rites of passage time, where as we first have our first menstrual cycle, we go through all of these processes, and building this Tulimat Lodge is a part of that. And so we sat together. My niece came for a couple hours and she did our card readings because, you know, we're contemporary like that. And we needed to talk about stuff, you know. We needed to see what the stars were saying. And we had Dr. Margot Thomas and Eric Habrowski come out. They live on the land, and Eric is a foodie. He actually grows the food that he caters, and it was made directly on our land, on my land that I've lived on, that I played in, that I had a cow come and hit me off the fence where he's actually growing the corn now. I have memory to this place, and now that food is, I'm able to eat it, and it is making me healthy. And it is because of these experiences that my art practice thrives. Building a hugo mound maybe isn't very artistic, but when you think about what you can do by making these designs of land and water and soil and wood structures to grow food and plants out of, it is art. It is an embodiment of health. It is a reflection of beauty. It is all the things that we need. And in the picture beside is Mauda Tamaz, who is a student here. She's an amazing artist. You guys need to pay more attention. She sewed corn stalks or corn husks together to make a traditional camp dress as part of her research of self and identity and Isoni College practices, which she was the first to embody here in our land, in our territory, in a fully woman-inspired and conducted practice, which does not happen anywhere else. Below is Barb again. She's teaching me how to make paper. We are literally doing this. And I've started by recycling my essays. I have one next from Stephen that he wrote notes on, and I'm like, yes, cut this. Put it in the blender and put some water on it. Let's reconstitute this so that we can make something a little bit more out of it. Because, you know, I always hear this from public art organizations. They're like, oh, but art has to be more. It has to be more than that. We were having this discussion with the Lake Country Municipal Committee a few months ago, and I said to them, well, I see that you guys planted a lot of a lot of pine trees, and that's great for the pine trees. We're going to be able to make a lot of pine needle baskets one day. That's so awesome. But what I'd really like to make is a canoe. And you know it's going to take 80 years, so why don't we grow canoe trees? Because you guys are watering the frickin' land anyway. And we know that if you're going to water it, it's going to survive. If we water it for 80 years, we're going to get a canoe. That's something more than, don't you think? And this is my final slide. I don't know if I've gone over. I'm sorry, I don't remember what time I started at. But everything I do, I'm allowed to do because my mom says that it's my path. And this is my mom standing with Master Tule mat maker Angela Buck in Wenatchee territory, because we are cross-border people. And we have to articulate that all the time. We have to make sure that the government knows that there's actually 6 meters of land over there, that direction. 6 meters that lasts approximately 500 kilometers east to west, that says nobody else owns it except for us. This is our territory. And that 6 meters of land is something that we need to explore more, because there's already free cameras there. We can perform in that space. And my mom says, Mariel, you need to find your own path, because I know it's not the same as mine. You don't think the way I do. And I sit down with my mom every day, except for this week because I'm here. I sit down with her every day and have tea with her, and I talk about my practice. And I talk about how it is that things came to me. And she says, you need to trust the people who are talking to you, because they came to you in a way that's unorthodox. So in 2015, I was in a car accident. I was really successful. I was doing a lot. I was actually getting my first feature film role as a lead. And I had a big fight at school, and it was about responsibility to Indigenous students that are from the land here. And I wasn't eating, so I was like 114. There's a lot of things that was happening at the time, and I had a car accident where I hit a house directly. And it changed me. It made me think about things, because who hits a house and survives? But also, who hits a house and has a dream about a deer before that, and then ends up making their whole entire MFA process about the deer that wasn't actually really there? These people who talk to us, they make it, others, when I say others, I'm talking about the medical profession. They make it bad when you say, somebody came to my room last night and we had a really good talk about what it means to lose a child. When you tell your doctor that, he diagnoses you with bipolar. And so I had to make them aware that it was not a diagnosis. It was what Richard was talking about. The deer came to me when my body died and revived my heart by throwing me into a house, which is really ironic, saying, you can hit this house and it's going to bring you back to life. You need that house, it's at Otter Lake. And I was telling everybody that day, because I was manic, I need to get to Otter Lake. That's where the kids are. That's where everything is. That's where everything is. And everybody's like, oh my God, there's something crazy. She's crazy. Yeah, right. I'm bipolar, right? No. I'm actually having an education. It was an education. And literally 5 years later, I went to Otter Lake and I saw who they were talking about. And my mother never met them. I try not to bring my trauma into my art, but it is there because that is my life. I'm an Indigenous woman. Everything is a glass ceiling, and we are all so fortunate to get anywhere as Indigenous women. Because everything's trying to railroad us. Everything is put into place to take it away from us. All the things that were spoken about in the keynote, that Richard spoke about, that all of those things we need to start doing here, and it is through in our practice that needs to happen, and it is through collaboration, and it is through remembering who the people are from this place. You know, there's a bear that lives here, a resident, and most of the time people are scared of it because we should be. But it is a reminder that there are people already here in place, and that we need to bring them back here, and we need to listen to them and talk to them. And there's more than just the people who are already associated with this institution. There's more people out there, and we just need to be able to bring them in. My mom's a silent speaker, and she would never approve of me saying that she is a teacher, because she doesn't want to teach anybody anything. She's like, I just want to learn how to do it for myself, because I've been shamed when I was a child. And I feel that shame still, and that's why tears come, and that's why my voice changes. And I use performance probably a little bit too much to articulate that I can be normal too. And I hope that everyone is able to learn a little bit more tomorrow if you do come to my show. That, yeah, I hope that you're able to come. So, thank you.
Thanks, Mariel. Thank you, Mariel. Yes, we'll be there tomorrow. Our next speaker is Sheldon Pierre Louis, member of the Silk Nation, multidisciplinary silk artist. Sheldon's ancestral roots have influenced the works in painting, drawing, carving, and sculpting. Sheldon sits on the board of directors for the Arts Council of the North Okanagan in his second term, as well as sits on the board for the Greater Vernon Museum and Archives. His work has been published in the Arts Council Guide in the North Okanagan 2016 and 2017, and he's the recipient of the First Peoples Cultural Council's Emerging Artist Development Award for 2015. He's the co-founder and lead visual artist of the Kawa Creative Aboriginal Arts Collective, and is the member of the Alula Indigenous Truth Collective. Sheldon has worked on a youth mural in conjunction with the Kelowna Secondary School Honors Art 12 class. Sheldon, please.
Okay, how do I get out of this mode into the full screen television on your laptop? Slideshow. This slideshow? Just on my laptop. Okay. And you tell me. White Cuskahalt, Chai Squeeze, Sheldon Lewis. Kintel in Kamapulat. I'm honored today to have Richard come and open this. And as he was talking, I was like, oh my God, like, I want to follow Richard. Like, I want to come in and present, because everything Richard was talking about, I was like, oh my God, like, he's talking about the same things I'm looking at in my art, and the same things, the same experience that are influencing my art. So when Richard came in, losing the mouse here.
Spacebar.
Here we go. So Richard spoke of our connections into the eastern part of our territory. He mentioned his ancestral hereditary line, which is also the same line that my family comes from as well too. This man that we see here on screen is Kinkinakwa, the salmon chief that Richard spoke of. Now, Richard himself has come in and stepped into the role of this ilmichum that we have here. And nobody's held that space since, I believe, his uncle Louis. And so it's been a big gap, but I think the impacts of the colonial structures that have come into our territory have uprooted those, and I hate to use this word because I know we probably have a better word in our language, and I don't agree with this word in English, but we had a system in place prior to the Doctrine of Discovery or Terra Nullius, long before first contact, long before any legislative pieces of paper that have dictate our lives now. And that system was a hereditary system. So it was based upon the training and the handing down of knowledge from knee-high until you were an adult. And when the first settlers came in, they started to pick away at that system. Because as Richard explained, our system was about inclusion, our system was about harmony, our system was about a holistic view. And the whole basis behind coming in with the Doctrine of Discovery and Terra Nullius, and then leading into the fur trade, as Richard alluded to, was it has always been about resource extraction. Always. We're still here to this day fighting on all sides of our territory. Our neighbors, our Secwepemc neighbors are fighting the same thing with pipelines coming through their territory. Our relatives down on the west coast are fighting constantly and tirelessly these industries that are hell-bent on taking our resources for their own benefit. Now, the idea around it when it first came in, and I was glad, I'm not sure who brought forward the Sir Wilfrid Laurier Memorial at the Rotary Centre, but I'm glad that that was put out there and put on display again, because that document was, you know, that was supposed to be the starting point of a new relationship between us and essentially what we would call little brother. We have a chaptique that kind of explains that the newcomers were our little brother at one point and stole a piece of paper, and because of it they were cast off across the waters, and we were told that they would come back again at some point with this paper, and they would use the knowledge that they thought was power against us, and it would be up to us to reteach and reintegrate little brother back into our world, our ways. And so, you know, the idea around reconciliation is, in my opinion, is a farce. It's a buzzword that politicians use to pat themselves on the back and convince people that they're doing good, when every action they're taking is about the resource extraction. Now, when Richard talks about that inherent responsibility of our Tumik to us, and our responsibility to the Tumik and our Timkulau, you know, I think in a lot of us, and whether, you know, we heard the first speaker today speak of the similarities in their own culture on how those origin stories seem to dictate and guide our practices as artists. And so my art has, at a point, kind of morphed into this voice, or this soapbox, I guess, to speak out against these issues and to bring some of those old histories back to the forefront. And a year or so ago, we had Dr. Jeanette Armstrong and one of our community elders, Madeline Gregoire, come into community and speak about the language and the connection of our language to the legal battles that we have. And through those discussions was flushed out that, I wish Richard was here because he'd know the word, but there's a word that describes our bloodline. And they gave a visual as imagining that there's a rope tied around your waist and your ancestors right from the very beginning, from that creation story that Richard shared, that every ancestor is still there behind you, still connected to you. Their DNA, their memories, everything they carry is still carrying forward on through you. And it was in that moment where I was like, pieces started to come together. You know, this Ilmikum here, and wrong one. Yeah, there we go. And here we got another one where this piece, I was actually here, I believe, 3-4 years ago, as part of this same summer of intensive, as a speaker to speak about my practice in art where I was at that point. Now this piece here is a depiction of our salmon chiefs, a young Kinkanakwa and CPAS standing behind them as mentor and student. And it was a reminder that those inherent responsibilities of an Ilmikum, of a hereditary chief, to fight against the system. And I brought forward that in a new context, that they're looking to us now to carry on their responsibilities of managing our Tungkulau. And although we're doing the best we can, we're struggling with it. And so when I came in and spoke to this piece, the idea around this was that it was an experiment of working with hides. As a visual artist, as a painter, I needed a new surface, something not, something that was ours, something that wasn't colonized. We always hear that paper, these documents and this stuff that we kind of govern ourselves by was not of us, was not from us, and that we need to start going back to old practices. And so something about it clicked, and I said, you know what, I got to find something new, something traditional, a new surface to put my message on, put my artwork on, so that way that message is conveyed in a new context, and it carries a little more meaning behind it. And this is going to kind of allude down to my time spent here these last few weeks, as I carried on this work from 4 years ago into the last few weeks here. But as I started to grow as an artist, I realized that, at 6 years old, I knew, I was like, I don't know what it was, but I was like, I'm going to be an artist. That's what I'm doing. And I fought everybody who told me, no, go be a doctor, go be this. That's not what I'm here to do. That's not what I'm meant to do. This is what I'm going to do. And so I never understood that, of just that drive or that want or that need. And so as I went through my journey, I ran into an addiction at 14 years old, carried that addiction of hard drugs until I was 32, picked up some alcoholism and a number of other traumas along the way, and my art practice and that gift, as I refer to it, as I think of it, kind of disappeared from me. And I was at a point where I could see the quality of my art diminish. I could see the want to do it diminish, and I was like, man, I gotta do something, because I was given this gift, so I gotta step out of this so I can do what I was meant to do. And so in my recovery, it's been, I think, 7 years, I found some purpose from that Ilmikum, knowing and tracing my ancestral lineage back to him and understanding that his responsibility was to manage the largest fishery in North America. And this one man took that responsibility on to ensure that there was enough for those to come. And so I started to look at that and, the impact on industry and how that's impacted us. And so a lot of my practice started to become about the salmon. And it's kind of fitting because as I've learned from another one of our members in the nation, Loren Tabasca, is that Intiktik is a doer. You know, when we think of Intiktik, he pushes through and he gets to where he needs to do and he does the job that he needs to. And so as I started understanding where my bloodline comes from and that connection to Intiktik, our salmon, my understanding of my responsibility started to kind of grow, and I started to explore that. And through my art, at a young age, I always looked at that time there was, you know, we had Morceau and Bill Reed and you know, a lot of well-known artists that weren't from this area. And so as I looked at theirs, I understood that what they were doing was telling their story of their people as well as their own personal story. And, you know, in the 80s, when Barb started her practice, Barb Marchand, you know, my father, Jerry, my auntie Lucy, there was a number of artists at that time that really started practicing art. And they became just a huge drive behind me. And Barb created, in my opinion, a very noticeable silk style of art that when you see today, you know who that work is. You know that that's silk work. And I thought, you know, I spent all these young years kind of lost without style, and I decided I need to move forward. And so at one point, Interior Health and the Okanagan Nation Alliance had contracted myself, David Wilson, and Les Lewis to create some artwork to put some silk art into our hospitals. And the idea around it was to convey what health was to you. And in this piece, you know, I found it, and to me is a rather iconic image of a woman whose name is Annie Hoey. And to me, it just speaks of a silk person, that imagery of that pizza, that digging stick in her hand, digging speculum out on the land. And so from that point, my style and my understanding that I need to now take my gift and create silk art started to move forward. And in this one, we have a piece that I did with some of our youth where I came in and created a mural. And it was based upon the story that Richard shared with us. And in the skilchin there, I can't pronounce it, but it speaks to, we gave our life for you. And so this is at the very front door of our health building. And in creating this, I wanted to show the young artists in our community that your art is more than just a hobby. You can convey messages, you can fight, you can stand up against things. And so the intent of this was reminding our health staff what real health was. You know, we've been so westernized in our thinking that health a lot of times is going to a doctor and getting a prescription and whatever. And you know, I wanted to convey to them and a reminder to them that health is being on that land, practicing your language and reconnecting. And so in that, I wanted our young people to, again, understand that if, as an artist, they have that responsibility that they need to use that voice to speak to whatever moves them in that point. Now, this was another piece that we did with two of the young girls as well, too. Through the Vernon Art Gallery's Ride on the Roof, we came in and we wanted to make a strong statement and just to say that we're still here. As I move forward, I talked about how art as a educational piece, you know, I've been kind of criticized at times where I know a few people, obviously not artists, but I've said, you know, art is a weapon. People are like, ooh, like, don't add that connotation to your work. Like, what are you doing? I'm like, no, like, that is what it is. We have to use what we have to fight something. And this body of work was based upon a chaptique of how Kaido brought salmon back to the people. And in that chaptique, we hear that the animal people are really suffering, and all they're eating are these little tiny whitefish, and they're really starving. And so Wolf asks Sinclair, can you go down and figure this out? Sinclair, yeah. He goes down south, down to the mouth of the Columbia on this journey to find out what's holding Antique from coming to the people. And as he gets there, he finds a fish weir across the dam, across the river, and there was some sisters there that were essentially hoarding these fish that were essential to the people surviving. And so one of them was a snipe sister, and Sinclair ends up breaking this dam and bringing the salmon back into the territory, and along the way he asks for wives, where the people brought him wives. He left fish there where they didn't. He moved on, and in a sense it tells you on why the salmon are there, but also within that chaptique, it also, Sinclair is talking to you about good governance. That asking for a wife, he was creating family ties within our nations and along our borders. And our Sikwa Ilmikum in Kuala had done the same thing. He had upwards of 15, I think, Tated wrote, possibly more. But he had wives along our Tanaka border, our Shekwetmek border. And at one point, him and his brother Kolilau at the Kamloops, they swapped children and said, you're going to look after my son and I'll look after yours. And what they did was they created an alliance there because they knew what was coming into the territory. And Kuala had early, I think in the 1800s or a little earlier, had seen one of the first settlers come in. So he knew, as a Sikwa Ilmikum, he was tasked with the overseeing of the entire nation. We had our Ilmikums, which Kinkanaka was, which were kind of a second hereditary line under him. And as they understood this, they seen that industrial impact that was coming in with them, the mining, a lot of miners coming into our territory, moving north, and at the time, a lot of fur traders started actually coming in. And actually, we're told that Kinkanakwa is part Haudenosaunee. There was some Haudenosaunee people that had brought some of the fur traders down into Fort Colville, and that's part of where my ancestral line lies, is we're also related back to Haudenosaunee relatives. Okay, I'm getting the hook here, so I'm going to skip forward. So when we talk about art as a weapon, we went into, I had one of our nation members, Dixon Terbasket, approached me on creating a youth project where we would go in and educate non-Indigenous youth in the school system about the impacts of colonialism. And through that project, we talked about the Indian Act, we talked about the white paper, we talked about the reserve system, the potlatch bans. We educated on the impacts that we were feeling, and from that we created this mural that the mural actually sat here in UBCO for a period of time because they helped fund the project. And what we did was we created some banners from it afterwards so we could, put it around the nation. And this one actually we put up a couple weeks ago in our Similkamik territory in the south, and it sits along Highway 3. And again, it was just an idea of this is what art can be for a weapon. Just real quickly here, I'm going to finish up here. This tama that you see here is my great-great-grandmother, Mariel Lazard. She was born in the Vernon area, but her family is part Metal and part Colville, and so she was the big inspiration for working with the hides and in creating the work there. And it was through this work that as I moved through it, I started filling the gap. Through my addictions, I struggled with identity, I struggled with belonging, and there was something missing there and I couldn't figure it out, and it was that connection to our people. And it was through coming back in and working on the project through First Peoples Cultural Council that I connected back to the practices that she had done with working with hives. And so it created a new, just a new drive behind me to continue to connect with my people, my culture, and through that work, you know, I started going out into our nation. And to jump ahead where I'm at now is I'm carrying on this practice of working with the hives. And I don't have the time to dive right into it, but my partner, Chisekwa, has spent her entire life training in a spiritual way, in a cultural way, to come in and be a spiritual person. And part of her training is learning how to conduct the ceremony that Richard spoke of this morning, the fasting ceremony of going up onto the mountain for those 3 days and getting those visions from our Tumik and our Timbulao to guide what we're doing. And so in one of the visions that was given to her that she was to pass to me was that I was to return to our old practices of painting on a hide. And I couldn't understand it. Again, this is linked to my not understanding at 6-year-old this drive, but in explaining this to one of our elders, Eric Mitchell, he spoke of how important it was of artists in our nation, because we were the ones that, as Richard alluded to, that we went around and we documented these visions, we documented a lot of these things that we were seeing. And Eric had shared with me, he said, you know, that was always your purpose. And he said, you know, you coming back, this vision coming to you guys is directly linked to that you were intended to pick up this work and carry forward. And here you see what I did here is this is working on scraping the bear hide. I made my own tools out of the bones of a deer. As again, what Richard would say was that it was our responsibility to take these pieces. And so, as I moved forward doing this work, it has now gone beyond the art realm of being an artist. And I don't, at times now, I'm struggling even with that word, because in English, that doesn't describe that intent of what we were to do. And so, part of the work this work with hides and this work that we were kind of guided through our vision, we spent 3 days. I spent my second year spending my 3 days out on the mountain, and we were given some of these visions, and now this is what my work has started to evolve into. I'm still doing the contemporary stuff, but there is now a higher purpose to what my skills and my gift were intended for. And so even though I still use it in a contemporary sense as a weapon to fight industry and to protest against those sorts of things now, we are looking at coming in and returning to these traditional practices as a way of moving away from that assimilation and moving back into a traditional place. So I've kind of gone over here, and I could have probably kept going. I cut a lot out, but for now, that's kind of where I'm at, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Sheldon. Well, we're here. This is the last artist panel, and we have the last speaker. Anne Riley is an Indigenous multidisciplinary artist living as an uninvited Slavey Dene Cree German guest from Fort Nelson First Nation on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Her work involves different ways of being and becoming, touch, and indigeneity. She received her BFA from the University of Texas at Austin in 2012, and in 2016 she graduated from the Native Education College with a certificate in Family and Community Counseling. She's exhibited both in the United States and Canada, and currently she's working on a public art project commissioned by the City of Vancouver with her collaborator, Cease Weiss and Riley's project, A Constellation of Remediation, consists of Indigenous remediation gardens planted throughout the city, decolonizing and healing the dirt back to soil. Anne.
Thank you. Let's just make sure this works. Yes, my name is Anne Riley. I'm Cree and Slavey Dene on my mom's side and German on my dad's side. I'm thankful to be here on Sokol territory. Thank you, Tanya, for inviting me to be here. I'm going to do this quick. We've had a really full day and my brain's really full. already. So I think, yes, this first work I'm going to talk a lot. Recently, I've been doing a lot of collaboration because I don't think we don't do our work alone, and burnout is real in the art world, and that's my way of fighting against that burnout is working and collaborating. And specifically, since I live in Vancouver, the unceded territory of the Musqueam and the Squamish and the Tsleil-Waututh Nations, I've met Cease Weiss, who has been one of my mentors, and she's Squamish, and we met through a BC Arts Council mentorship grant I did about 5 years ago, and it was basically my decolonial MFA that doesn't exist. So I mentored with queer women, and she was one of them. And she's a plant lady, she's an ethnobotanist, and so after our mentorship we started working together. And I think a lot about that, my practice about when I'm living in a territory that's not my territory, how I should not be taking up that space as an Indigenous visitor, and what it means to make space and not take it. And that's always a question I'm asking myself, because even as Indigenous artists, we still can have colonial ways of making, and we really have to fight against that. And so this is a work that we collaborated on last summer at the Banff Art Center, and it's a work called the Soundtrack for the Radical Love of Butterflies, which is based off of, we were asked to be in the show based on our public artwork, the remediation gardens, and we didn't want to show any work from that, and so we knew at the Banff Art Center there was a public artwork by Indigenous artist Mike McDonald, who planted these butterfly gardens throughout Canada, Turtle Island, in the 90s. So he planted about 6-7 of them, and the only permanent one is at the Banff Art Center. But Lisa Myers, a really great Indigenous artist, is doing a project right now where she's replanting all of these gardens. And so Cease and I are kind of working with her as well. So when we were asked to do the show, I said, well, let's do something, because that butterfly garden is a remediation garden. And I thought, let's do a soundtrack for the garden. And let's do a release, and we'll release the butterflies, which are the tapes that we made, these tapes that you see. And so on the tapes, we were thinking about what are the sounds, the decolonial sounds that we want to hear more of. And for us, that was hearing the stories of Indigenous women who have started social justice groups. So the whole soundtrack is interviews with Indigenous women who have started social justice groups, remediating the various systems they work in. So thinking these pollinators and these plants, these more than human beings, we're working in our own ways as well, remediating the systems that are toxic towards ourselves. And so this was the release. We drove up, and you see Tanya maybe in there? Maybe it's the next one. Tanya was there at the release. We had an elder from the community open it up, which hadn't really happened at the Banff Center. So also that work as being an Indigenous artist, it's that was successful enough for Cease and I to be you need to start doing. It's remediating these lack of awareness around these things. And so we did this release, and everybody who was present got a cassette tape, and there was a responsibility in taking that tape, because we framed these tapes as butterfly medicine, because these Indigenous women had offered so much on these tapes and their work. And so we wrote a prescription on there as well, because we didn't want people to consume these stories, or what is quite often done, Indigenous grief being consumed or commodified. So I put a prescription on there about people listening with a responsible heart. And so what that meant was knowing where your heart is before you even enter into this medicine. And it was really interesting, after we talked that way, everybody who came up and received a tape, something had shifted in them. And I could feel it energetically, and could cease, and there was kind of this like humbleness that is like really lacks in the art world. It's true. And so here we are with, yeah, there's one, there's Tanya. I think you see Tanya. This next one. Okay, that's the elder. She was so sweet, Yuna. Just hanging out with her, and it was so beautiful throughout the whole talk. She just kept the sage lit, and it just really cleared the space from any kind of energetic stuff. It was, because it was hard. It's hard to get up and be visible as an Indigenous body in these white populated spaces. It can be very traumatic. And so that's what I mean in the sense that I don't like doing it alone, and I don't have to. So, it's such a pleasure to work with someone like Cease, who I'm learning to love. I mean, that's part of our work. And it's like, I enjoy making my work. And so this is our public art project right now that we're doing for the city of Vancouver. We're about a year into the project. It was commissioned maybe 2 years ago. It's called the Constellation of Remediation. Right now we have some sites confirmed, which will be Indigenous remediation gardens planted. So hopefully we are creating a constellation in the city by activating these different sites. And what constellations are, they're ways of telling stories in relationship. So there's very many constellation layers in this project, because we're also building a toolkit for urban Native youth to have access to medicine knowledge, who maybe can't go back to their territory, they don't have access to that. So we'll be working with Anya with that. We're already working with the Native Education College, where Cece and I were both students at one point. This is one of Cece's projects, and this is where we meet a lot of the time. It's Harmony Garden, where she started this in her territory about like 15 years ago. And it's this really beautiful space in the middle of her community, and this like pedagogical place where she's really teaching all of these really radical ways of being. So this is an important part of our project of where we meet. And this is where the soundtrack for The Radical Love of Butterflies came about. We were just hanging out in this garden. This is one of our sites. It's the Anya site. Anya is the Urban Native Youth Association. So this site right here was once a vacant gas station lot, and the gas company donated this land to the youth center to build housing for youth. And so they've been raising the money for 15 years. So a major part of our public art project was to raise awareness for this. And finally, we just got the confirmation that we are going to be able to do a garden in this site and heal this land with the youth and build a constellation story before they build the buildings. So healing that land with the youth. And also another part of that project too is a major question we're asking. What does it mean to make unceded? What does it mean to make public art on unceded territory? Because we're the only Indigenous artists commissioned in this commission, and to have any kind of consultation with the three nations. So we have three matriarchs who are on working with us on the project that Cease, of course, has deep relationship with, who will be doing ceremony with us at each constellation site. They don't speak on behalf of their community. We're not asking that. We're just asking for them to be in consultation with us and helping us heal the spaces. And this is us introducing the project to the Native Education College this last year. So that's one of our home bases in the constellation, because it's a safe place for us to actually work through the project and feel at home with each other, which is really rare. And this is, and part of our project and research is that we're doing a bunch of workshops with Indigenous plant knowledge hole keepers. This is this really amazing couch and elder we just met at the UBC farm. And this is us doing a workshop. How much time do I have? I want to okay, like a few more. Oh, maybe I'll just, Okay, I'll talk about, so this is a talk I did recently at the Grunt Gallery, and this is beautiful art done by Wes, who's here, who did the signage for this event. This is my twin and I. We recently, this last summer, did a residency at the Banff Center that was a moose hide tanning residency, a Dene moose hide tanning residency. And my sister, I was like, I didn't want to do another residency alone. And so I was like, come do this with me. And she's a social worker, and she was like, no, I'm not an artist. And I said, I think you're probably doing one of the most creative things in helping our people. So no, I think you're a brilliant artist. And so I helped her write her application, and we did it together. And I was like, plus we're Dene twins, like they're just is gonna work. and it worked. So we got in, and Dene Naho was facilitating it, which is this rad collective up north of Dene folks revitalizing a lot of Dene knowledge. And so we spent about 13 days, built a camp at the Banff Art Center, which if you've ever been there is a pretty colonial art center. But then in the back of it, we had all these Indigenous folks reclaiming this knowledge. And it was hard work, spiritually, emotionally, physically. And at one point, this is the great one, because we carved into the hair Skoden, which meant, most Native people know what that means. And so this is Jean and I. It's kind of a reputation of our relationship, push and pull. And so through this process of going and working with this moose tanning process, which is so brilliant and so bodily and of the flesh, how can you not be transformed by working with this being? And softened. So while I was going through this process and learning this and being one of maybe the fourth woman in my lineage to finally touch hide again, and learn this process, this phrase just kept coming to me, this notion of radical softening. And I was like, oh, the whole process of moose hide tanning is this radical softening. And how can I not be softening with this animal? Because it's offered its life for me. For us, if that doesn't soften you, we've lost that way of being. That's why we treat, we're in the issues we're in, because we've lost this way of being. And so that just hit me when I was like, oh, this is all about softening. How am I softening with this? And so there we are together, happy moment. And this is we did this amazing thing where we all together as a community worked on 4 hides, which is pretty crazy to get that done in 2 weeks. Moose hides that are this big. And we scraped and and it's amazing how at the end, what softens it is the smoke, because it goes through all of these phases, raw hide, then it goes back into the brain solution, because you have to use the moose brain to there's a certain enzyme in it that softens it. And so we all got a piece of the moose hide, and it was this beautiful ceremony at the end because we had all been changed. And so this is a work I just made based off of this is the smoke from the residency. This is a card and a poem on the back that I did. It's at the Banff Art Center in a show right now. Maybe I can quickly talk about this last one. Okay. This last project is an upcoming project I'm working on. It'll be at a gallery in Vancouver called Art Speak. I was approached by the curator a year ago to have a solo show, and my response to that was no, I don't want to take up space, because one, I don't want to follow that trajectory in the art world of being a young Indigenous artist, get a solo show, do the next thing, do that. And I was like, that's just not what I want to do. And so I said I would like to organize, because I don't like the word curate, because then everyone will think I'm a curator after that. So I'm going to find a word today that means to organize in a basis of love. Because also in all of our Indigenous languages, we never had a word for love. So the show is going to be a group show of queer Indigenous elders who have paved the way for myself and other queer Indigenous folks. So this artist right here is Ayana Miracle, who's not with us anymore, but was a major mover and helper in forming Grunt Gallery. I met her before she passed on to the spirit world, and she really impacted me, and she was like a grandmother. And so it'll be really a show in honoring Ayana, because one of the things that really solidified the show for me was I went to look for Ayana's Wikipedia page and she didn't have one, and it made me really mad at the feminist Wikipedia thoughts. And I was like, if that's the whole thing, if that's the point of the show is to get her a Wikipedia page, I feel like that's successful. And those are my kind of values and the things that I follow, because that's based in a love ethic. Because all of my work is based in love. So, and a queer love, because I'm queer. So Ayana, and so the title of the show is, Her Words Are Not Vanishing as She Leaves Her Howl Inside Me. And so the next artist that will be in it is this author who wrote this recent book called Two-Spirit Journey, Manny Checkaby. And she has these amazing drawings in this book, and she's been an amazing community builder around queer Indigenous rights in Thunder Bay. And so this show came about kind of in just dreaming for the shows I desired us to see more of. And the other artist in the show will be an artist, poet named Christos, who's based in Seattle, Washington, who's a lesbian Indigenous poet who's been saying the things since the 70s. And so these are the drawings that are so amazing by, this is one of Manny's drawings. This is another Manny drawing. This is one of Christos' books, Not Vanishing, hence the title of the show. This is a drawing by Christos that we'll have, and I recently met Christos. That picture of the group of people was at her honoring, and I'll end it with the story of how I invited her to the show. I went up to buy this book, her erotica book, because they're so hard to find, because I think all the lesbians have them. And so I was like, oh my God, you have all of them. And so I was buying them, and then I just asked her if I could email her about a proposal. And she said the most beautiful thing. She's like, oh, can't read email because my eyes, but I will respond to your letters. And then I just thought, yes, this is the kind of people I want to work with. What a pleasure. And I just said to her, well, the show that I would like to, it would be an art proposal, like an art show I would like to invite you to be a part of. And she grasped her heart and she looked at me with tears in her eyes and she said, no one's ever asked me that, or you want to show my drawings? No one has ever asked me that. I always wanted to be an artist before a poet. And so we both had this moment that I was like, the show's so much bigger than myself. And I think of that in my work, is that my work is not about me. It's actually about this bigger energy and this bigger vision of helping other people. And like Cece and I's work, we're always telling each other is that it's actually at the core of it is how we're healing each other, because that ripples out into everything else we do, into the communities we work in. And so that healing moment I had with Christos, just even before we began our work, solidified. I was like, oh, this is the right work. And so hopefully, yeah, that'll be in a year, and hopefully that show will, I've already got some partners in how it will tour across to different places, because there'll be a publication. I'm going to republish some of Ayana's performance writings, and Manuel and hopefully Christos, their writers, will probably write some essays. Because yeah, they're the ones who paved the way for me, and I can't not honor my elders. So that's my work so far. Thanks.